We continue now at the top of Daf 65a Daf and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 65a. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that Rav Yosef Bar Chama would seize the avodim from people who owed him money, and he would use those avodim to work for him. And so his son Rava asked him, how are you able to do that? And so now he responds, the reason why he's able to do that without compensating the owners is because it's actually denichole de lo nistrei avde. The owners, it's actually good for them because they don't want their avodim, they don't want their slaves to be bottled, doing nothing. It's healthy for the avodim, and therefore he doesn't owe them any compensation. Rashi explains, de lo nistrei avde shelo yargil lios bottle v'yasatzel, that the slave should not become accustomed to doing nothing and to becoming lazy. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Le, so Rava said back to him, Hani mili heicha de lo masik bezuze. Now that's true. In other words, if you seize the eved, if somebody seizes the eved of his friend and uses the eved, so he doesn't have to pay, that's true in a situation where that person that he's seizing the eved from doesn't owe him money. But by the master, kevan de masik bezuze, since this person owes you money and now you're taking the avodim and that person owes you a debt, so mechsi ribis, so it looks like ribis, it seems to be like interest, so it should be problematic on that account. The Amar of Yosef Bar Menyumi Amar of Nachman, because Rav Yosef Bar Menyumi said that Rav Nachman said, Aval bisha amru hador b'chotzer chaver shalom idaito, even though they say that if somebody lives in the courtyard of his friend without his knowledge, eino tzarech l'halos lo schar, so he doesn't have to pay him rent. Again, that's the whole discussion of zenenev zelo chaser. But hilveu v'dar b'chatzeiru, but let's say he lent him money and now he's living in his courtyard, so tzarech l'halos lo schar, he does need to pay him rent, otherwise it looks like ribis. And so the Gemara says, Amar Le, he said to him, Hadri B, said, I retract from that, I'm really not allowed to seize the avodim for that reason. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Haiman demasik zuze derevisa bechavri, if somebody is owed one zuz of interest from his friend, v'ka'azli chite arba grive bezuza, and the wheat, it goes for 4 grive, which is the same as 4 sa per zuz. Beshuka, that's the going rate in the marketplace. And so instead of giving a zuz, he can in theory give these 4 sa of wheat, but instead, ihu chamisha, instead of giving him 4 sa of wheat, he actually gives him 5 sa of wheat. He gives him a little extra, even beyond the interest. And so the Gemara says, Abaya says, Kimafkinon mine, when we take away the interest, because the halacha is that if the lender collects interest, it has to be taken away from the lender and given back to the borrower. So arba mafkinon mine, we're only going to take away the 4 sa of the wheat. We're not going to take away all 5, because it was really only 4 sa, which represents the zuz of interest. And ida chozolehu dekamozal gabe, and the other one, he was just giving him a discounted rate. It's like he's doing him a favor, but that's not considered to be part of the interest. That's the opinion of Abaya. Rava says, Chamisha mafkina mine, we actually take away all 5 from him to make kara b'toras ribisa asoy liyadi, because it did come to him as ribis, it came to him as interest, and therefore it is all taken away from him and given to the borrower. And Rashi explains, Ki mafkinon mine haribis, when we take the ribis away from him, shalakach, meaning we take away the interest that he took, we take it away and give it back to the borrower. And why do we do that? Because we follow Rebbe Lozer. Tiyamar ribis kitzutza yotza b'dayonim. Rebbe Lozer says that if you have fixed interest, it is taken away by the courts. The kaimalon kivasi l'kamon. We're going to paskin like Rebbe Lozer later on. And the Gemara continues, V'yamar Abaya, and Abaya says, Haiman demasik arba zuze derevisa bechavri, if somebody's owed 4 zuz of interest from his friend, v'yoiv le glima begavayu, and he gives him his cloak, that's instead of the 4 zuz, he gives him the cloak as the interest. So kimafkinon mine, so when we take the interest away from the lender to give it back to the borrower, arba mafkinon mine, we take away 4 zuz from the lender and give that to the borrower. Glima lo mafkinon mine, we don't take away the cloak from the lender. And Rashi explains, Glima lo mafkinon mine, we don't take away the cloak, meaning mecho kaim, it's considered to be a sale that is a good sale. Essentially what happens is he gives him the cloak, and now he's going to give him 4 zuz. It's like he's buying the cloak for 4 zuz, uktzitza saribis, yachzer lebaylev, the fixed amount of interest, which is the 4 zuz, that gets returned to the original owner, that gets returned to the borrower. And the Gemara continues, Rava says, no, Glima mafkinon mine, we take away the cloak from him. My time, what's the reason? Ki heichi de lo lemer, so people shouldn't say, Glima de mechasi, that the cloak which he's covering himself with, Glima de mechasi v'koi, Glima de revisahu, this cloak that this person is using is a cloak of interest. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Haiman demasik tresar zuze derevisa bechavre, if somebody is owed 12 zuz of interest from his friend, v'yagar lechatzer demitagra basara v'ogre nehile betresar, and so he rents the courtyard from him, he doesn't actually pay the rent. Now normally the rent would be 10 zuz, but instead he says, we'll count the rent as 12 zuz, I'll essentially rent it for free, and that will be my collection of interest. So kimafkinan mine, so when we take the interest away from the lender to give it back to the borrower, meaning essentially he's going to have to pay that rent, tresar we're going to actually collect 12. He essentially rented that courtyard for 12 zuz. He's going to have to pay the rent of 12 zuz. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Acha mi Difti l'Ravina. Rav Acha from Difti said to Ravina, V'lei molei, but why can't the lender say to him, he could say to the borrower, Ki igra hachi dehavaka mishtar shili. The only reason that I was willing to rent it for 12 was because it was a pure profit in that situation. I wasn't actually paying, we were counting it as interest. But hashta de lo mishtar shili, but now that I'm not profiting, ki da'agri kuli alma hu da'garn. I want to pay the same rent as everybody else. I want to rent it for 10. I don't want to rent it for 12. And the Gemara says, no, he can't make that claim, Misham Damar Le, because he can say back to him, Savart v'kibalt, you understood exactly what the terms were and you accepted it, and therefore you're going to owe me 12. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Marbin al aschar v'yein marbin al amecher. A person's allowed to increase when it comes to rent, but he's not allowed to increase when it comes to a sale. What that means to say is that if the person agrees to pay everything up front, he's going to pay a little bit less than if he pays it a little bit later on. So by a rental, that is okay, but by a sale, that is not okay. And the Mishnah explains, Kate said, how so? Let's say he rents him his courtyard. The Amarlo, he says to him, if you pay me right now, if you give me all the money now, you pay me 10 sela, and that's going to go for the whole year. However, vim shel chodesh b'chodesh, but if you're going to pay me monthly, so then sela l'chodesh, then it's going to be 1 sela per month, which is going to be obviously more than 10 sela. It's going to be a total of 12 sela. So that's mutter, even though he's essentially saying you pay me everything up front, you're going to get a discount, since we're talking about a rental that is going to be mutter. Machar lo es sadeo, now let's say he sells him his field. V'yamar lo, he says to him, if you give me the money now, harehi shalcha be'elef zuz, it's going to be yours for 1,000 zuz. But if we wait until the time of the harvest, b'shnei masar mana, then it's going to be for 12 mana, so that's already asur, that's going to be forbidden, because again, a sale in that situation is going to be problematic. And we will note that 12 mana is the equivalent of 1,200 zuz, so essentially it's a discount of 200 zuz if he pays everything up front. And the Gemara says, Maishna Reishu, Maishna Seifa, what's the difference at the beginning of the Mishnah and what's the difference at the end of the Mishnah? Meaning, what's the difference at the beginning of the Mishnah by the case of rental where it's okay, and at the end of the Mishnah by the case of the sale where it's not okay? And the Gemara says, Rabba v'Rav Yosef d'Amri Tarvayu, Rabba and Rav Yosef, they both say, Schiras eina mishtalemes ela basof. When it comes to rental, the obligation to pay really is at the end of the year. V'hai kevan de lo mata zimne lemigvan. So therefore, since the person's time to collect hasn't really come, lav agar noterle. It's not over here that he's charging him extra because of the delay in payment. If the person were to pay at the end of the year, it's not that he's paying any extra because there was a delay. That's the actual time he's supposed to pay. Mishvahu dahachi shavya. This is actually the actual value of the rental. V'hai de kamar leim. When he says to him, in me'achshav atanosin li, that if you pay me now ahead of time, hareyu l'cha be'eser solaim l'shana, then I'll give it to you for 10 sela for the whole year. So ozolehu dekam mozel gabe, he's actually giving him a cheaper rate. So in other words, if he pays early, he's going to get a discounted rate. If he pays at the regular time, then he's going to pay the regular rate. There is no interest over here because of a delay, because it's not a situation of delay. He hasn't delayed the payment if he pays it at the end of the year. And the Gemara continues, in contrast, Seifa at the end of the Mishnah, when we're talking about a sale, so Kevan de Zavini Ninu, since this is really a sale, Uvoy Lemishkal Dmei Me'achshav, really the person is supposed to collect the money right now. The seller wants to get his money now. Hilkach Agar Noterle, so therefore, Hilkach Agar Noterlehu, therefore if he's going to delay the payment, he's actually paying a little bit extra because of the fact that he gets to delay the payment. That's considered like interest, v'yasser, and it's going to be asser in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Dako barabonan b'hamil, so the Rabbanan examined this, v'ukmu akra, and they found a pasuk that supports this idea that rental is paid at the end of the year. It says in the pasuk, Eschir shana b'shana, we understand from that pasuk, we darsh in that pasuk, Schirus shel shana zu, it means a rental of this year, eina mishtalemes ela b'shana acheres, is paid in the next year, meaning it's paid at the very end. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, V'im legoran, if the seller says to the buyer that if you pay me at the time of the harvest, b'shnei masar mana, so then I'm going to charge you 12 mana, I'm going to charge you 1,200 dinar, so then asr it's forbidden, because essentially he's charging him a little extra for the fact that he gets to delay the payment. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman says, Tarsha Shari, tacit interest, is considered to be permitted. Rashi explains, Tarsha Shari limchor sechora b'hamtana b'yoser midameh. In other words, you sell something and you say that the person can delay the payment, and you charge a little more, that's okay. Uvilvachali yifarish lo, as long as he doesn't explain to him, he doesn't state explicitly that im me'achshav, that if you pay me now, hareu loch b'pachos, that you're going to get it for less. Eliyim chor stam, he should just sell it stam. Bekach v'kach liyom ploni, says this is what you owe me on this particular day. That would be permitted. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rami Bar Chama Rav Nachman. Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Nachman the following question. V'amri lo Rav Ukva Bar Chama Rav Nachman. Some have the version that it's Rav Ukva Bar Chama that asks Rav Nachman the following question from our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, V'im legoren b'shnei masar mana. If he says to him that if you pay me at the time of the harvest, it's going to be 12 mana, so then it's asr, it's forbidden. So you see the tacit interest is forbidden. The Gemara says that's not the case at all. Amar Lei said back to him, Hasam Keitzle over there, he fixed it as interest. He said, if you pay me now, it's going to be less. You pay me later, it's going to be more. But over here, look, he didn't fix it as interest. He just said, you pay me this amount on this particular day. And Rashi explains, Kotzle me'achshav harei ulach bepachas. He said, if you pay me now, it's going to be less. Then he's making it clear that he's essentially taking an extra payment for the fact that he's allowing a delay in the payment. That's why, again, in our Mishnah, it would be problematic, but in normal situation of tacit interest would be permitted. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Papa says, Tarsha didi shari. In the case of tacit interest by me, what I generally do, that is permitted. And Rashi explains, Tarsha didi shari, osa shecher tamarim haya, he made beer from dates, umocher lo bizman hazol betishrei. What he would do is, he would sell it at the time that the going rate was cheap, which was Tishrei, but he would sell it at the higher rate, Keshar Shel Nisan. He would sell it at the Nisan rate, Umamtin Lo Ad Nisan, and he'd actually give the person until Nisan to actually pay the money. So in other words, the person wouldn't have to pay until Nisan, and when he would actually pay, that was the going rate of that time, but he was actually selling him the product in Tishrei. So Rav Papa said that is permitted. And the Gemara continues, my time, and what's the reason? Why does Rav Papa say that his Tarsha is permitted? The reason is because Shechroi Lo Pasid. Number one, the beer is not going to be lost. Rav Papa says, I can in theory hold on to the beer until Nisan and it's not going to go bad. And Zuze Lo Tzrichnen, I don't need any money, meaning to say I don't need the money right now anyway. I'm a wealthy person, so it's not like I'm delaying some payment that I really need. So Anahu Deka Avidna Milsa Gabi Lokeach, I'm just doing a favor for the Lokeach. It's not really a situation of interest. If I wanted to, I could just keep the beer until Nisan and sell it at the higher rate, and I don't even want the money right now anyway, so it's not considered to be interest in this situation. Rashi explains, Shechroi lo pasid eino meskalkel. The beer is not going to be ruined. Vayisi yachol hatzniu ad Nisan. I could have kept it till Nisan and sell it at that price. And zuzi lo tzrichn. I don't need any money. Shani yasher. I'm wealthy. V'eni dochog limchor kashar shel achshav. It's not that I need to sell it right now. I'm just doing a favor essentially and selling it to this buyer early, and that's why it should not be considered interest. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Sheshes Breider Ravidi Rav Papa. Rav Sheshes, the son of Ravidi, said to Rav Papa, My chazi mar to azlis basar didach. But why does the master see fit to following it, to going according to your perspective? You're saying from your perspective, it's no gain because you could just keep the beer and you could just sell it later and you don't need the money now anyway. But why look at it from that perspective? Zil basar didhu, you should follow the buyer's perspective. Dilo havelu zuzi, because if the buyer had money, have a shakli ki hashta, they certainly would buy according to today's rate. They would want the cheaper rate. Hashta de les luzuze, but now that they don't have money, shakli ki ukra de lekame, so they're getting a delay in the payment and they're paying the higher rate. So from their perspective, it should be considered a case of interest. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chama says, Tarsha didi, the tacit interest in my situation, vadai shari, is certainly going to be permitted. And Rashi explains, Amar Rav Chama, Tarsha didi vadai shari, the tacit interest in my case is certainly permitted. The case was, Mocher prakmati haya, he would sell merchandise. Mocher b'makam hazol, he would sell it in an area where the rate was cheap. Kesharshu nimkar b'makam hayokar, but he would actually charge the higher rate like it would be sold in areas where it was more expensive. Umamtin lahen, and he would delay for them, meaning he told them, you don't have to pay me right away, you're going to pay me the higher rate, but you don't have to pay me right away. And then they would bring it up to the area where they could sell it for more money, and that's how they would make money. But the key over here is, he would actually take responsibility for the items when they took it from place A to place B. When they took it from where he was to the area they wanted to sell the merchandise, he took the responsibility. So it wasn't alone yet at that time. And then the buyers, they would make money with the various merchandise that they would purchase there, b'ma'osav, with his money. And then when they would have the money to bring back to him, they would bring the money back. They would take responsibility to bring the money back to him. And so Rashi notes, now since they didn't accept any responsibility on the merchandise, it wasn't really a loan until they actually sold the merchandise and they had the money in their hands. And so then they had that money in their hands. So that money was essentially what was lent to them, and then they have to bring it back to him. So there's no ribis, there's no interest. The actual money that they have in their hand is the loan, and they bring it right back. So that's why he said, in this situation, it's certainly not a problem of ribis. And the Gemara continues, my time, what's the reason? It's beneficial for them that I should take achrayas, that it should be in my rishus. First of all, wherever they go, the tax collectors don't bother them. And also they get a preferential treatment at the marketplace. And Rashi explains, Nakti l'hushuka, they would get preferential treatment in the marketplace. Machrizin shelo yadam rashay limchor ad sheimachruhem. They would announce that nobody would be allowed to sell until they could sell. The idea was that Rav Chama was a respected individual. He had connections with the Reish Galusa, and therefore they got preferential treatment. And Tosas over here notes, Nakti l'hushuka, they got this preferential treatment, and that's why they're willing to pay more. So Tosas say, Dilav hachinaf, you don't say that they got this extra treatment, Haviyasr, it actually would be forbidden. Now you'll say, why should it be forbidden if he took achrayas? That's what Rashi just explained. Once he took achrayas, so the loan is exactly the amount of money, it shouldn't be interest at all. And so that's what Tosas say, Afal pisha achrayas haderech hayal Rav Chama. Now even though Rav Chama took responsibility for the merchandise while it was on the road, Sharei hayu torchin lo lahavi schoraso ulamachar b'schar halvasa, but still, they're doing all of this bother to carry his merchandise and to sell it, and that's all, in effect, they're doing that because of the loan that he's extending them, so that's why it would still be problematic. But now already that they get preferential treatment in the marketplace, so then even when they are returning, it's all because of the effort. Essentially, we say that it's a proper exchange. They get preferential treatment in exchange for the tircha, in exchange for the effort that they're putting in, v'shari, and therefore it's permitted. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 65a Amud Beis.